Hey, welcome back to What the Tech. I am your host, Troy Vermillion, and as a person who has been working remotely for the last 5 years, I know firsthand how to adjust to a new work environment and how challenging and specifically rewarding that could potentially be. Now, as remote work continues to gain in popularity in the modern workforce, managing this type of work environment presents unique challenges and benefits for HR leaders as well. Now, like any other workplace, a remote team actually needs effective communication and collaboration tools to get things done effectively and efficiently. So, however, these tools specifically can pose special challenges when working across time zones or with employees who may need access to reliable internet or more adequate at-home workspaces, as an example. Now, in addition to managing such a diverse team, this actually requires a great deal of flexibility on the part of both managers and employees, but it also provides opportunities for innovation and learning, and often these are lacking in a traditional work environment. So I'd like to invite you into this conversation, and the person I have on as a guest today is fantastic, so let's go. My next guest is a 20-year HR vet and the Chief People Officer of OrderGroove, which is a dynamic platform that enables relationship commerce experiences for hundreds of brands and retailers, including some of the big names like L'Oreal, Hot Chocolate, and PetSmart. Now, shifting specifically consumer interactions from a one-and-done transaction to a frictionless and highly profitable recurring revenue relationship. And just to share a few of her notable credentials and accolades, Karen has actually received several Best Places to Work awards during her 6-year tenure, and she's also the CEO and Chief Career Coach for Shine at Work, where she actually helps individuals and employers with all things in the HR realm. Now, with a background in theater productions and a multitude of notable top human resource awards and titles actually under her belt, she's uniquely equipped to help guide our industry into the new frontier of remote work. It is for these reasons and many more, I'd like to welcome Karen Weeks to the show. Thanks for being with me here today, Karen.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited for this conversation.
Absolutely. I think there's so much to unpack. And, I think the exciting part about this, I think we're all learning together, from different seats. And I think the perspective from the Chief People Officer seat is so important when we're talking about just the change and how work is being done today. And, talking with you previously, I think you've just got a wealth of ideas and strategies and obviously some things that haven't worked because we all deal with that as well. So, today we're going to be talking a lot about how to, live in our current state, remote or hybrid kind of work arena, especially in the tech industry, which, you and I have experienced. But what opportunities that brings as well for individuals, for organizations, and so forth. So I'm just excited to talk to you about this.
Yeah, thank you so much. There's so much learning that's happened. And like you said, we are still learning every day. This week, I have an example of something we learned from that I can't wait to share. So it's an ongoing evolution of conversation. But at the end of the day, if we're trying to help our teams feel connected to what they're doing to each other while driving the business forward, that's what we're all trying to figure out.
Absolutely. Well, you moved down to North Carolina, which is something we were just talking previously. You couldn't really do if you were going to work in some capacity in tech outside of some of the larger tech companies like IT services and things like that, because you kind of had to be close to where things were happening. And so before we kick off kind of like the strategies and some of the things that you've implemented there at OrderGroove, I'd like to hear kind of your story and kind of what was it like to unplug from where you were at, plug into somewhere else and be that person that was kind of a little bit maybe isolated from the rest of the organization.
Yeah, it was so interesting because when we found out that the place that we were renting was going to be sold and we had to sort of figure out where to go next, it was not in our plan to leave New York, but it really at that moment felt like the right next step for us. We were obviously able to get a lot more space and everything, so we were really excited about the move. But the first time I had to go back to New York for a meeting, I was staying in a hotel and it was so weird. And I all of a sudden had to think about how was I going to meet up with certain people because we didn't have the office anymore. So a lot of things became had to be much more intentional and felt very, very different. Even just things like every once in a while I used to meet our CEO for a walk in the park, and now we don't have that opportunity anymore. So there is definitely this change that even though I chose it, I was very excited about it, all the positive things, there was definitely some grief that I had to go through that I wasn't co-located with a lot of the people I used to be co-located for. And by the way, Order Groove is spread out across the whole US. I mean, we have less than 30% of our team is still even in the city. So it's not like I was the first to go or anything like that, but it was just being in that routine for so long. That's when it really felt real that we were a remote first company, when I went through that myself. So down here in Charlotte, I've tried to find people that I know through other experiences or past colleagues or whatever, and we might get together at a co-working space just to be together. I try to go to a coffee shop every once in a while. We do have someone in Raleigh and someone down in Charleston, so we're saying, is there some way for us to meet up somehow? So we're just trying to find ways to stay connected, even if we're not all together.
Speaking of connection, I think there's so many really good resources and tools, and so things have evolved to the point where it makes it easier, it makes it more possible. So let's talk a little bit about some of the things that you've implemented in your time there to help create that sense of community within the organization.
Yeah, so one tool that we use is a Slack integration called Donut. And so it does random pairings. We do them pairings of 4, so whatever that is, quadruple, whatever's. And it's, in theory, just helps you connect with people, and you have a virtual coffee. So because it's a random pairing, it hopefully is people that you don't work with day to day. And the purpose of the meeting is no work, unless you want to share like an interesting project you're working on just because you don't know each other. But it really is meant to represent meeting someone at the kitchen table in an office and just kind of eating lunch together. So Donut has been a huge win for us. Everybody really enjoys it. So that's been really helpful. I think otherwise we've just tried to do things that bring people together in ways that they don't interact on a day-to-day basis. So another sort of small group activity that we did was we created Zoom rooms of different hobbies. So if you want to play board games, go into this room. If you want to learn origami, go over here. If you want to do a whiskey tasting, go over here. So again, it sort of randomized who might be interacting, and it was non-work related. So those were some of the places where we were saying, as a community, we still need to find ways to get together. How can we do that? And then from a work standpoint, just really over communicating. We created additional buddies for new hires. So you get a buddy within your department to learn more about your role. You get a buddy that's won a culture award, so you can learn more what it's like to be a good Order Groove citizen. And then you also get another new hire buddy that maybe started 3 months ago, so that they can help you onboard that person that you can kind of turn to ask, what does that acronym mean again? So hopefully that, again, connects you to different people. Connection has really been one of our focuses over the last couple of years.
So I'm curious, what kind of engagement are you getting with these sorts of things? Because, I think the typical introvert is going to be like, I'll pass, right? But there are a lot of people out there that have that need for, communication. I think we all have that need. So don't get me wrong. I think an introvert might, look at it a little bit differently of like what I need and the volume maybe I need. But a lot of people really, especially if they are isolated, need that connection. But I'm curious, just across your entire organization, what kind of engagement are you getting on those work plus sort of things?
Well, and that was one of the learnings that we had. So when we first went remote, we did things like an open Zoom call during lunch hour, and anyone could pop in, again, to sort of recreate the, like, I just grabbed my sandwich and I'm sitting down with you. And we did not see a lot of engagement there, because you sort of didn't know who was going to be there. Was anybody going to be there? Was it going to be like me and this one person eating on a Zoom call? So that was too open. So we got rid of that. And that's where we went to these more smaller groups. So if I am a little more introverted, I only am going to have a couple of people to talk to, but it's more than one. So we used to do the donut just as a pair, and that wasn't as popular because, everybody's nice, but if we don't have anything to talk about, that's like too much pressure. So we went to the 4 because it's not too big, but it's not too small. And then the theory of like the hobby rooms is that, again, even if I'm less comfortable just sort of like showing up and being whatever, I know at least I'll have something in common. And so that will drive some of the conversation. But we've also done things like book clubs, or we also have online Slack channels where if maybe I don't want to get on another Zoom call because I'm so tired from being on Zoom, I can sort of partake in some social things through a Slack channel. We've got like a cute pets one, and so that kind of sparks conversation. So we're trying to meet people where they are and giving different ways to connect. So to your point, different personalities or different comfort levels can find some way to connect with someone.
I am curious, just my own brain goes to like what I would prefer, right?
Yeah.
My wife and I love to play board games. And so like if there was something with board games, especially like a Catan or something that we play a lot of, I would probably be interested in something like that, even if it was a digital version. But I'm curious, like which ones of those groups have continued to kind of grow that maybe you didn't even expect?
Yeah, so online trivia is actually one of our most popular ones. It was the thing that's so great is a lot of these are not started by the HR team. It started by a team member that said, "Hey, I really love doing this. Does anybody want to do it with me?" And those are the ones that honestly take off because it feels much more organic. So definitely trivia night's really popular. I do think the board game one, which can be more like Catan, or we actually found different online like Scrabbles and that kind of stuff. So I think those are probably the two most popular. Although I won't lie, our pizza making class that we have done a couple of times is pretty popular too.
Well, who doesn't love pizza?
I know.
That's probably like my favorite thing, aside from ice cream. But that's not like a meal. I guess you can make a meal of it, but I could argue pizza is at least a meal.
It checks
got
a
all
couple
the things on it, right? We got some carbs and we'll call it fiber, right?
Yeah.
We've got some cheese or dairy. We've got vegetables and the protein. So it's a full course.
Absolutely,
meal, right?
Absolutely.
On one slice, every slice. So that doesn't surprise me at all. You remember that game Trivia Crack?
I don't think I knew that one.
So Trivia Crack was a game on your phone. You could play with friends, and so like you'd connect your Facebook to it, and then you could play with all of your friends on Facebook that actually had the phone app, right? And one of the things I loved about it, it would ask you these questions, and it'd give you a countdown to answer them, and then did you get it right? Did you get it wrong? And then it would compare you with your friends, right, on the same exact questions, and you go back and forth with these, which is it's similar to like the Scrabble sort of thing.
Oh, fun!
You put your letter down, you go back and forth. And I'm the best guesser in the world. I don't always know the answer, but my powers of deduction are fantastic. So I would just crush people because I would make very quick, decisive things. So I can see how something like that, especially if it was in a work environment similar to like maybe fantasy football or something, would be a lot of fun because then you could have some water cooler, bragging rights and so forth. And I'm sure you've experienced that.
Absolutely, yeah. Our head of client services starts every team meeting with a gauntlet throw. So, would you rather live in 0-degree temperature or 100-degree temperature? Is a taco a sandwich? Like, hamburgers, hot dogs, like those sort of things. Because it just people have so much opinion on some of those simple things, and it immediately gets the team talking. So that's sort of her go-to team activity.
Yeah, I can only imagine the GIF game that's happening in the chat at the same time. Like the people are just like, hitting you with stuff. So I'm curious, kind of taking a different approach to it. Like, I think one of the hardest things is that many people are dealing with isolation. Even if there's so many benefits, there could be a million benefits to remote or hybrid work. And let's just say you've got somebody who's completely remote.
Yeah.
And maybe they don't have kids that they can plug into. Maybe not even, family members that are close. But they're working, 8 to maybe 10 hours, a day sometimes. And they love their work. That's all a part of it. Like we hope people love their work, but at the end of the day, there's a bit of isolation that happens when you're not in some sort of community. Yeah. So I'm curious, how have you tackled that at Order Groove? And maybe what are some of the ideas that you could share with us today that might be impactful for those sitting in your seat or other leadership roles that they could be thinking about or implementing to help with that?
Yeah, and I think it kind of goes back to what we were saying earlier around what does that person specifically need based on their personality. So, could we sponsor them to get a floating desk at a co-working space? So at least they're around other humans, even if it's not the humans that they work with day to day. Could we find a way to do more team gatherings, or at least like a hub? So one thing that we've started to look at is where do we have kind of clumps of people? So I mentioned no one's technically here in Charlotte with me, but Raleigh is only 3+ hours away. Charleston's, I don't know, like 4-ish. Atlanta, I think, is even only 4. So if we got together for a couple of days, would that be, an easy quote unquote offsite? So we've been trying to find ways that based on what the person is looking for, how can we support that? We have also done, outside of a company-wide event, some teams have started to get together. So, a team might get together in like Denver because enough people are sort of more west. And so again, it's easier to bring them together. So I think it really just depends on how is that person feeling isolated and what can we do to help them? We're really fortunate. We're only 120 people, which is nice. Like that's a good growth story for us, but it's small enough where we can kind of look at individuals on their own and figure out what do you as the individual need. I don't have to worry about 500+ people where I'm setting precedent and have to create policies where I have to apply it across the board. So we can really still keep the individual in mind.
Yeah, I think that's important. But even so, when you do get larger, I think the proximity gets a little better too, right?
Yes.
So,
yeah.
As Order Groove specifically grows, maybe you get to 500, you're going to have more people in proximity to each other just naturally, right? Whether that's, we've got 15 people in Florida, we've got, 11 people in California. Or whatever, right? So you're going to have people just naturally closer to each other, even if they're in different business units for the organization. There's some of that. I'm curious, how important do you feel it is today to do something, not even just on the small basis, but bring as many people together, face to face? And are you doing any of that at Order Groove right now, where you have like a national conference where you kind of bring everybody together, or a national kickoff or something like that?
Yeah, so we are doing that once a year. We're looking at considering it twice a year, but we're going to do once a year a couple of times first to see what the right cadence is. We want to change up the location. So we did the first one in New York. This year, we're probably going to do it down Florida. Then we might do a West Coast one, or at least closer to the West Coast. So that's one thing that we're doing. We're doing it, to your point, as an annual kickoff. So let's celebrate the year. Let's talk about what's happening next and do it all together. Where we've been trying to figure out the right balances is in between those, what do we want to do? So one thing that we just tried this week, which didn't work quite as how we thought it was going to, is we now have created these Slack channels for different areas. So one, to what we were just talking about, if I go to Denver on vacation, I can see if there's a Denver Slack channel, and I can Slack those folks and say, hey, I'm actually going to be, in the area. Do you all want to grab coffee? So it allows me to connect with people in areas that maybe I wouldn't have thought of. But we also did that because that way, if those groups wanted to get together now and then for a local happy hour or something, you at least know who those people are. Like we were getting feedback of, I don't even know where people live anymore because they just show up on a Zoom and I have no idea where that is. So what we tried this week, which didn't work as strongly as we had hoped, is we had our Q3 kickoff and we said, hey, if you're in one of these hubs, we'll pay for a conference room, we'll pay for some snacks, and y'all can get together. So at least you can kind of watch it together and then chit chat and just spend some time together. And it, for some reason, didn't take off like we thought it was going to. I think part of it is people are so used to not commuting that all of a sudden they realized, oh no, I have meetings all day. How am I going to get in? I didn't have childcare for that day. Other folks were saying, it's nice, but we're just going to sit in a room and watch TV together, which doesn't feel that special. So we thought we'd try something and it didn't really land, but it was in lieu of, we can't get together every quarter. We're probably going to get together once a year, maybe twice a year. What can we be doing in between that's not just on the team level? Because some teams are definitely meeting. I know the product team just got together recently. The finance team just got together recently. So that's happening, but we are trying to think of something more cross-functionally.
I think the important part there is you're continuing to try new things.
Yes.
Because the environment continues to change. The needs continue to change. And so I love the adaptability that you kind of bring to that approach. Speaking of adaptability, I'm thinking around training. I guess I'm just old enough to remember when you fly everybody in, you put everybody in a, hot, training room, and you feed them garbage all day, and you just sit there and you listen as people present new ideas or strategies. Obviously that's an old and tired way of thinking, because I think there's a lot of different ways that we can do training today. But I'm curious, when you're approaching a new topic or, new ways that you're going to be deploying, you mentioned a kickoff, you're doing that, but like, what about new hire orientation? How does that work?
Yeah, absolutely. I have many binders on my bookshelf from those exact trainings from back in the day. Yeah, it's really interesting. So we have not specifically brought new hire classes together. I don't think we hire at a pace where that makes sense, because we might have someone start one day and then 3 weeks later we have another new hire. Where we have had clumps, so we had a couple of client services people start together this summer, and so we did find a way to bring them together. One person happened to be in Austin, which is where our head of CS is, and so they spent some time together. So it was more opportunistic versus intentional. I think as we think about trainings, again, we're doing everything virtually as of right now, unless the teams are coming together to do something specifically. So the sales team might get together to do some training because it's going to be much more effective in person. I have heard of some of my HR colleagues talk a lot about, though, not forcing, but pushing some start dates together so they can have a new hire class. And it may not be their first week, it might be their first month. They all come to one of the hubs to meet more people. Quite frankly, some of the I-9 compliance stuff has changed recently. They've had to think about that a little bit more. If they have done huge product releases, does it make sense, again, at least to do it in some hubs? But at least at OrderGrew, for now, we're doing all that virtual. Now, what that means, though, is that we have to make sure that training is really engaging. There's follow-up. Managers know how to do the coaching afterwards to make sure that the training then turns into action and it's actually applicable. So there definitely takes a lot more work, I think, to do some of it virtually still.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It's hard to just watch videos and for them to force you to click on a button just to continue to stay engaged. Yeah. And so I think, thinking outside the box and in ways that you can make that more interesting for the average person is nice. Taking another step towards something else, I think you're really kind of keen on, especially with your activity around LinkedIn and other social networks, is how to use social today, whether it's LinkedIn or other Facebook groups or other things. Like, how do you use that to keep people engaged beyond just the kind of, hey, we're putting out some company stuff, everybody like, share.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting because we have started really promoting those posts internally as well, because we realized it's actually an engagement tool for our current team. So yes, as a company, of course, we're posting stuff on LinkedIn to drive sales and awareness and all the things. But as we started more intentionally sharing it with the team, saying, hey, we just put up this post. Yes, of course, we would love for you to share it. But we also noticed the team got much more excited about things because they sort of lost track of it, right? Because one thing I keep forgetting, because I am such a big LinkedIn user, that a lot of people are not on LinkedIn as much as I am. So OrderGrew may post something, but half our team never saw it because they never went on LinkedIn. So this way we're able to celebrate internally as well as externally, and hopefully, push engagement on LinkedIn as well. So when I think about that for OrderGrew, I think that's one thing I've really seen a win with. For me personally, I've been doing a lot more on LinkedIn around connecting folks, because so many of my HR friends are either burnt out, tired, laid off, not certain about what's going on in their company, going through some really tough stuff in their company. And so I've been trying to do it more as like a motivation rally cry. How can I help you? So if I know of a company that's hiring, I'll say, hey, I know a great tech company in New York City looking for an HR coordinator. If you're looking, let me know and I can try to make some introductions. Or I know a great HR ops person that's on the market. If you're hiring, let me know so I can help make those introductions. So just kind of trying to spread the word around things to help support any peers, but especially my HR friends.
I'm curious because I have, in just the last, few weeks, I've heard my HR connections like overwhelmingly tell me they're looking for new jobs. I'm curious from your seat, why do you think that is? Just kind of generically.
Yeah, I think it's probably because So what tends to happen is if HR folks have survived whatever crisis that has happened, and we still technically have a job, like we weren't part of layoff, like we ourselves were not impacted by layoffs, and we get through that because we were probably the ones dealing with it and doing it, then we take a breath and say, how do I feel that went? How am I feeling about my company? How am I feeling about our culture? How am I feeling about our leadership team? And so once we sort of survive the moment, then we pause and say, okay, so now how do I feel about this? And so my gut is that as HR folks, we just had to help our companies through another, roller coaster ride through an uncertain economy. I think, knock on wood, things are leveling out a little bit. So now we're going, okay, so now how do we feel? And so I think some people are feeling, I don't know if my company handled that right. I don't know if I'm going to be part of the next round. So maybe I should kind of poke my head up again.
Yeah, it's a hard thing. We saw it really hit the technology market.
Yeah.
I think there was maybe some ambitious assumptions on how AI was going to be able to take a lot of the administrative duties. We're seeing that there's definitely things with artificial intelligence that have improved process and things like that, but there's a lot of hallucinations out there as well.
Yeah.
So,
Yes.
I think I read a statistic that 750,000 of the jobs that were lost will never come back because of AI. I don't know how accurate that is.
Yeah.
But, I feel like so many technology companies were over their skis in how many people they had hired just before that. That it almost made sense that there was going to be, basically a regression from those oversaturated numbers. But I also think there'll be a lot more innovation that happens because of it, because a lot of these quality people that have lost their job will either plug into their own thing, maybe found their own company, or jump on board with a fast-growing company that could be in the AI space or other things that we'll see some more innovation through this season than we've seen in previous ones when the big juggernauts were just, gobbling up all the talent, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I can't get over the number of people that, like you said, either started their own thing or honestly are taking a risk on some really small companies that are trying to start up. And maybe that's because they feel like some of those, I'm talking like 3-person startup kind of stage, are hearing the stories from others and like, oh, those unicorn examples aren't existing anymore. I have to think about profitability sooner. I have to think about market fit sooner. I have to figure this out sooner. So maybe they think there's less risk with those right now because people are taking the lessons of the last few years. I guess we'll find out in a couple of years.
We sure will, won't we? Well, as I kind of round third base to bring this home, I'm thinking, there's so many elements around, and I hate the word managing, but leading, people in a remote or hybrid environment where, some people, there are still offices out there and they can go do that. But I think of the idea of accountability. And I think about how important it is that people be invested with your mission and your vision, and then how accountability comes alongside that. And then all the inner workings of trying to do that in a remote environment. I'm curious to just get your perspective on what has worked and certainly what hasn't worked.
Yeah, I think the first thing is just treat your team as professional, responsible, good workers and people. And it's only if they prove you wrong that then you need to micromanage them and like worry about if they're doing their job. Never once at Order Groove when we went remote did we say, well, are people going to keep working? Because we knew our people were good, smart, hard workers. And unless someone made us question it, we just trusted that that's how they were going to behave. When you assume bad intent, that's when you look for it and, it sort of rears up. If you assume good intent, that's usually the case. So I think when it comes from accountability, set really clear goals, make sure people understand how to achieve those goals. If they're struggling, talk about why they're struggling and figure out what the gap is and support them. And if they can't get there, they can't get there. And that's another conversation. But I think the real lesson learned is if you assume people aren't going to do their job, they feel that, and then they're not going to be engaged and they're going to almost like live up to that prediction because you already projected that you don't think they're going to do the right thing.
Yeah, great points. I've experienced all of that before. So I think, from your perspective, it's really assuming good intent until, the evidence proves otherwise.
Yeah.
Great points there. I'm curious, anything else, from your perspective that has been either a challenge or something that you'd like to touch on in and around just the kind of the environment we're all dealing with now, and certainly I think a lot of us enjoying, or even the back to work push that we're seeing for a lot of organizations to just force people back into the office.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think from the last part of that is if you're going to have people go back to the office, there has to be a why. So I don't ask me to come back to the office and then be on Zoom calls all day, because I can do that from my home. But if we're going to have certain days where people are there for, maybe it's no meeting day, so we can actually all be together and be more collaborative. Or it is a meeting day and I'm in the meeting with people face to face versus on a Zoom. So create the why behind why you want people to get back together. And if you have been remote and you're moving to hybrid, think about the impact that is for people who aren't in those hubs that we talked about, or think about how that's going to change your hiring plan. Because you can't have a room of people together and then that one poor person on the Zoom call. So just sort of think about those pieces if you decide to bring people back to the office. I think the biggest learning from helping people stay remote successfully is communication. So the number of times when we're in an office where you walk past someone, you go, "Ooh, I need to talk to you about something because I literally saw you and that reminded me." We now have to seek people out a lot more. And there's not that conversation as you're walking down the stairs together. I have to schedule a Zoom call or I have to Slack you to talk to you. So being much more intentional with your communication and really thinking through who needs to know what, when. Do you need their feedback? Have you made a decision? You just need to roll it out. Have you talked to everybody that's been impacted? So really taking the extra time in your communication plans and being intentional to make sure people feel connected. Because to your question earlier about accountability, if people feel connected to the work they do and the company they work for, the performance and results will be there. So you just want to make sure everybody's in the same boat and rowing the same direction.
Yeah, I think that's really what it's about. So I want to thank you for coming on here, Karen. I know that you do a lot more than just as a chief people officer. You're really, speaking into the community of human resources and to people. So I would like to give them an opportunity right now to just maybe follow you. Where's the best way to connect with you and kind of follow what you've got going on out there and the good work you're doing?
Yeah, thank you so much. So definitely follow me on LinkedIn. I do actually have my own podcast called Shine at Work. I do it with a partner of mine, and we talk a lot about career development and how to find the job that makes you really shine your brightest at work. So that's another place to follow us, and that's on YouTube and all the Spotify and all the places. So those are probably the two best.
Awesome. Well, I want to thank my listeners for staying with us this entire time. I know that you got a lot of really good information from Karen, hopefully maybe one or two nuggets from me. And I want to thank you for listening to What the Tech, and we'll see you next week. Take care.